The small cafeteria at the edge of the city was busy as usual that morning. People in suits came in and out ordering coffee in a hurry, rushing toward their offices. Among them was a man who stood out, not because of wealth or style, but because of how ordinary he looked. His shirt was slightly faded, his shoes had seen better days, and his face carried lines of exhaustion. Yet behind his tired eyes there was something gentle, something steady. He was a single father, and every morning before the sun came up, he had already packed his child's lunch, ironed a school uniform, and made sure there was breakfast ready on the small wooden table in their tiny apartment. Only after that would he rush to work, taking whatever jobs came his way just to keep the bills paid and the lights on. The world rarely noticed men like him. They blended into the background, working quietly, surviving one day at a time. But on this particular morning, his path would cross once again with someone who did notice him, though not in the kindest way. The CEO walked in, dressed in a tailored suit that looked like it cost more than the single dad's rent. His shoes shined, his watch sparkled, and the air around him seemed to carry the weight of authority. People greeted him with nervous smiles and polite nods. He barely acknowledged them. For him, respect was expected, not earned. When his eyes landed on the single dad, he smirked. "Well, look who it is," the CEO said loudly, making sure others around could hear. "The man who thinks mopping floors is a career. Tell me, do they pay you enough to buy new shoes, or are those antiques?" A few people chuckled nervously, not wanting to anger the CEO. The single dad paused, gripping the handle of the mop a little tighter. He didn't respond. His pride stung, but he had learned long ago that answering back only made things worse. Words couldn't change someone's heart if they weren't willing to see past appearances. So he kept cleaning, his head down, his thoughts drifting back to his child. He reminded himself why he was here. Every drop of sweat, every insult swallowed, every long shift. It was all for the little boy waiting for him at home, the one who looked up to him with innocent eyes and believed he was the strongest man in the world. The CEO wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his expensive coffee, his voice carrying across the room. "You know what amazes me? That someone like you actually has a kid? Poor thing. Must be embarrassing to say my dad cleans after other people. Don't you think?" This time the words pierced deeper. The single dad looked up for just a second, meeting the CEO's eyes. There was no anger there, only a quiet sadness. He wanted to say something, anything, to defend himself, to protect the dignity of his child who had nothing to do with these cruel jokes. But instead he took a slow breath and returned to his work. The customers around shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at their phones, pretending not to hear. Others forced small smiles at the CEO's comments, unwilling to stand against him. In a world where power often silenced compassion, it was easier to stay quiet. But silence for the single dad was not weakness. It was restraint. He knew life had already taught him lessons that the CEO had never faced. Losing his partner, working 3 jobs, learning how to braid his child's hair in the morning, how to sew buttons back on school shirts, how to stretch a few dollars to cover a whole week's groceries, that was strength. Real strength didn't need to shout. When his shift ended, he left the cafeteria quietly, walking out into the cold morning air. His hands were rough, his back ached, but as he pulled out his phone and saw a picture of his child smiling, holding a school project proudly, a small smile touched his lips. That was enough to keep him going. The CEO, meanwhile, returned to his world of meetings, contracts, and numbers. To him, the encounter was nothing more than a moment of entertainment, something to laugh about later at dinner with his colleagues. He never imagined that the man he mocked would one day hold his life in his hands. Later that evening, after finishing another shift at a local grocery store, the single dad walked home through dimly lit streets. His body begged for rest, but his heart was full when he opened the door to his apartment and heard his child's laughter. The boy ran into his arms, chattering about his day at school, the art project he worked on, and how he had been picked to read a story aloud in class. The father listened carefully, nodding, smiling, giving all the attention he could. No matter how tired he was, his child never felt it. At home, he wasn't a man mocked for his work. He wasn't invisible. He was a hero. After dinner, the two of them sat by the window looking at the city lights. The boy leaned against his father's arm. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to make enough money so you don't have to work so hard. Then you can rest." The father swallowed the lump in his throat. He brushed a hand through the boy's hair and said softly, "Don't worry about that. Just focus on your dreams. That's all I want." Those words were true. Every insult he faced, every long night, every missed meal was for this child. His greatest dream wasn't wealth or recognition. It was to give his child a life better than his own. Meanwhile, in a tall glass building across the city, the CEO sat in his luxurious office, sipping whiskey as he laughed with friends about the janitor dad. His friends chuckled, shaking their heads, though some didn't find it as funny as he did. But the CEO thrived on attention. Mocking others made him feel bigger. What he didn't know was that life had a way of turning the tables. The same man he mocked for being small, invisible, unimportant, he would soon become the only one standing between life and death for him. And when that moment came, all the laughter would turn into tears. But for now, the single dad tucked his child into bed, whispering goodnight, promising silently to keep going no matter how hard things got. He turned off the light, sat by the small desk in the corner, and began sorting through bills. It was never easy, but he carried hope inside him. Hope that one day, the world would see not his worn-out shoes or faded shirt, but the heart of a man who never gave up. The night was quiet, and as he finally closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him into sleep, he didn't know that tomorrow would bring a twist neither he nor the CEO could have imagined. The small cafeteria at the edge of the city was busy as usual that morning. People in suits came in and out, ordering coffee in a hurry, rushing toward their offices. Among them was a man who stood out, not because of wealth or style, but because of how ordinary he looked. His shirt was slightly faded, his shoes had seen better days, and his face carried lines of exhaustion. Yet behind his tired eyes there was something gentle, something steady. He was a single father, and every morning before the sun came up, he had already packed his child's lunch, ironed a school uniform, and made sure there was breakfast ready on the small wooden table in their tiny apartment. Only after that would he rush to work, taking whatever jobs came his way just to keep the bills paid and the lights on. The world rarely noticed men like him. They blended into the background, working quietly, surviving one day at a time. But on this particular morning, his path would cross once again with someone who did notice him, though not in the kindest way. The CEO walked in, dressed in a tailored suit that looked like it cost more than the single dad's rent. His shoes shined, his watch sparkled, and the air around him seemed to carry the weight of authority. People greeted him with nervous smiles and polite nods. He barely acknowledged them. For him, respect was expected, not earned. When his eyes landed on the single dad, he smirked. "Well, look who it is," the CEO said loudly, making sure others around could hear. "The man who thinks mopping floors is a career. Tell me, do they pay you enough to buy new shoes, or are those antiques?" A few people chuckled nervously, not wanting to anger the CEO. The single dad paused, gripping the handle of the mop a little tighter. He didn't respond. His pride stung, but he had learned long ago that answering back only made things worse. Words couldn't change someone's heart if they weren't willing to see past appearances. So he kept cleaning, his head down, his thoughts drifting back to his child. He reminded himself why he was here. Every drop of sweat, every insult swallowed, every long shift. It was all for the little boy waiting for him at home, the one who looked up to him with innocent eyes and believed he was the strongest man in the world. The CEO wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, sipping his expensive coffee, his voice carrying across the room. "You know what amazes me? That someone like you actually has a kid? Poor thing. Must be embarrassing to say my dad cleans after other people. Don't you think?" This time the words pierced deeper. The single dad looked up for just a second, meeting the CEO's eyes. There was no anger there, only a quiet sadness. He wanted to say something, anything, to defend himself, to protect the dignity of his child who had nothing to do with these cruel jokes. But instead he took a slow breath and returned to his work. The customers around shifted uncomfortably. Some looked down at their phones, pretending not to hear. Others forced small smiles at the CEO's comments, unwilling to stand against him. In a world where power often silenced compassion, it was easier to stay quiet. But silence for the single dad was not weakness. It was restraint. He knew life had already taught him lessons that the CEO had never faced. Losing his partner, working 3 jobs, learning how to braid his child's hair in the morning, how to sew buttons back on school shirts, How to stretch a few dollars to cover a whole week's groceries, that was strength. Real strength didn't need to shout. When his shift ended, he left the cafeteria quietly, walking out into the cold morning air. His hands were rough, his back ached, but as he pulled out his phone and saw a picture of his child smiling, holding a school project proudly, a small smile touched his lips. That was enough to keep him going. The CEO, meanwhile, returned to his world of meetings, contracts, and numbers. To him, the encounter was nothing more than a moment of entertainment, something to laugh about later at dinner with his colleagues. He never imagined that the man he mocked would one day hold his life in his hands. Later that evening, after finishing another shift at a local grocery store, the single dad walked home through dimly lit streets. His body begged for rest, but his heart was full when he opened the door to his apartment and heard his child's laughter. The boy ran into his arms, chattering about his day at school, the art project he worked on, and how he had been picked to read a story aloud in class. The father listened carefully, nodding, smiling, giving all the attention he could. No matter how tired he was, his child never felt it. At home, he wasn't a man mocked for his work. He wasn't invisible. He was a hero. After dinner, the two of them sat by the window looking at the city lights. The boy leaned against his father's arm. "Dad, when I grow up, I want to make enough money so you don't have to work so hard. Then you can rest." The father swallowed the lump in his throat. He brushed a hand through the boy's hair and said softly, "Don't worry about that. Just focus on your dreams. That's all I want." Those words were true. Every insult he faced, every long night, every missed meal was for this child. His greatest dream wasn't wealth or recognition. It was to give his child a life better than his own. Meanwhile, in a tall glass building across the city, the CEO sat in his luxurious office, sipping whiskey as he laughed with friends about the janitor dad. His friends chuckled, shaking their heads, though some didn't find it as funny as he did. But the CEO thrived on attention. Mocking others made him feel bigger. What he didn't know was that life had a way of turning the tables. The same man he mocked for being small, invisible, unimportant, he would soon become the only one standing between life and death for him. And when that moment came, all the laughter would turn into tears. But for now, the single dad tucked his child into bed, whispering goodnight, promising silently to keep going no matter how hard things got. He turned off the light, sat by the small desk in the corner, and began sorting through bills. It was never easy, but he carried hope inside him. Hope that one day the world would see not his worn-out shoes or faded shirt, but the heart of a man who never gave up. The night was quiet, and as he finally closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him into sleep, he didn't know that tomorrow would bring a twist neither he nor the CEO could have imagined. The morning began like any other. The single dad woke before sunrise, made breakfast for his child, and sent him off to school with a hug and a smile. He then hurried through his shifts, working first at the grocery store and later at the office building where the CEO spent most of his time. It had been a long week, filled with the same cruel remarks from the CEO. Each time they met, the wealthy man made sure to remind him of his place. "Careful not to leave streaks on the glass," the CEO sneered once. "If you mess up, even your son will be ashamed of you." The words hurt, but the father kept his calm. He told himself again and again that he was doing all of this for his child. Nothing else mattered. That evening, the building buzzed with activity. The CEO was hosting an important dinner on the top floor, a gathering filled with influential people, investors, partners, and other executives. The father worked quietly in the hallways, collecting trash bins, wiping tables, and making sure everything looked perfect. No one noticed him. To them, he was invisible, just part of the background. But as the evening went on, something unexpected happened. After giving a speech filled with pride about his company's success, the CEO returned to his table. Laughter and clinking glasses filled the room. But then, mid-sentence, his words suddenly stopped. His face turned pale. He clutched his chest, gasping for breath. At first, people thought he was joking. A few laughed nervously. But when his body jerked and he fell against the table, the laughter turned into screams. Glasses shattered, chairs scraped, and chaos filled the room. The CEO collapsed on the floor, struggling to breathe. His eyes were wide with fear. The powerful man who always seemed untouchable now looked small and fragile, like anyone else. People stood frozen. Some shouted for help. Others pulled out their phones, unsure of what to do. No one rushed forward. No one wanted to risk making a mistake. But one man didn't hesitate. The single dad dropped the trash bag he was holding and ran straight to the CEO's side. He had no medical training, but instinct took over. Kneeling on the floor, he loosened the CEO's tie and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay with me," he said firmly. "Don't give up." The CEO's face was drenched in sweat, his body trembling. His eyes darted around the room, filled with panic. For once there was no pride, no arrogance, only fear. The father called out, "Someone call an ambulance." Now a few guests scrambled to make the call. Meanwhile, the father leaned closer, checking if the CEO was breathing. His breaths were shallow, uneven. His pulse felt faint beneath his skin. Without wasting another second, the father began chest compressions, pressing rhythmically, counting under his breath. His palms pushed against the man's chest again and again, while people around watched in stunned silence. "Come on, breathe," the father urged. "Don't give up now." Minutes felt like hours. Sweat dripped down the father's forehead as he worked tirelessly, his arms aching but his determination stronger than the pain. Then, finally, the CEO gasped, a sharp, desperate sound, like a man breaking the surface of water after nearly drowning. Relief flooded the room. The father kept him steady, speaking softly, grounding him in the moment. "You're going to be okay. Just hold on. Help is coming," he whispered. The sirens soon echoed outside and paramedics rushed into the hall. The father stepped back, giving them space, but his eyes never left the CEO. Even when others had frozen, he had moved without thinking, driven by something deeper than resentment or pride. As the paramedics lifted the CEO onto a stretcher, the man's trembling hand reached out, grabbing the father's wrist. His lips moved, though his voice was weak. "You saved me," he whispered. The father only nodded. "Anyone would have done the same," he said quietly. But in truth, not everyone would have. In that room full of powerful, wealthy people, it was the man they mocked, the one they overlooked, who stepped in. The CEO was rushed to the hospital, and the dinner ended in silence. Guests left, whispering about what they had just witnessed. Some felt ashamed for doing nothing, others shocked that the man they once ignored had been the only one with courage. The father stayed behind, picking up broken glasses and clearing the tables. His hands shook slightly, but he carried on with his work. He wasn't looking for praise or attention. For him, saving a life wasn't about recognition. It was about doing what was right. When he finally left the building that night, the city felt strangely quiet. Streetlights glowed against the dark sky as he walked home, exhausted yet heavy with thoughts. He wondered if the CEO would even remember what had happened once he recovered. Perhaps he would go back to his old ways, mocking and belittling. Or perhaps something had changed. Back at the apartment, his child was already asleep, curled up with a blanket. The father leaned down, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'm home." He sat for a long time beside the bed, just listening to the soft breaths, grateful for the life that gave his own meaning. Meanwhile, in the hospital, the CEO lay in bed, machines beeping steadily beside him. His body was weak, his mind foggy. But one thought kept replaying. The face of the man who had knelt beside him, refusing to let him slip away. The man he had mocked again and again, yet who had been the first to act when his life was on the line. For the first time in years, tears welled in the CEO's eyes. He realized how fragile life truly was, and how wrong he had been to measure people only by their wealth and status. The image of the single dad's determined face stayed with him through the night, echoing louder than the sound of monitors or the footsteps of nurses. The turning point had come. From that night on, things would never be the same. For the CEO, for the single dad, and for the bond between them that was yet to form. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of machines. The CEO lay propped up against white pillows, his face pale, his body weak from the sudden health scare. He was used to control, to power, to people rushing when he spoke. But here none of that mattered. Here he was just another man clinging to life, reminded that all his wealth and pride could not stop his heart from failing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same image, the janitor's face leaning over him, hands pressing firmly on his chest, voice steady and strong, urging him to hold on. The man he had laughed at, insulted, and humiliated in front of others was the very reason he was still breathing. That thought would not leave him. It gnawed at his mind, leaving him restless even when the doctors told him to rest. On the second day, He asked one of his assistants about the janitor. "Where is he? Did anyone thank him?" The assistant looked uneasy. "He went back to work that same night, sir. He didn't ask for anything, he just left." The CEO stared out the window. The city lights flickered in the distance, so different from the sterile brightness of the hospital. "He saved my life," he whispered to himself, "and I treated him like dirt." For the first time in years, his chest ached not from sickness but from guilt. Days passed and his health slowly improved. But his mind felt heavier than ever. He thought back to every insult, every cruel laugh, every time he had belittled that man just for doing his job. He remembered the uncomfortable silence of others in the cafeteria, the way no one had ever stood up against him. He had enjoyed the power then, but now he saw the truth. It had not been power. It had been arrogance, and it had cost him something more valuable than money: his humanity. Late one evening, when the nurses left him alone, he broke down. Tears slipped down his cheeks as he whispered, "I was wrong. So wrong." His voice cracked in the empty room. He, the man who had never shown weakness in public, cried quietly like a child. He promised himself that if he ever faced the janitor again, he would not let pride silence him. He would say the words he had buried for too long: "I'm sorry." Meanwhile, the single dad continued with his routine. His life hadn't changed. He still woke early, worked long hours, and tucked his child into bed each night. He never expected gratitude from the CEO. Saving his life had been instinct, nothing more. But deep down, a small part of him wondered if maybe, just maybe, the man had seen him differently in that moment. A week later, the hospital discharged the CEO. He was thinner, quieter, his steps slower than before. The company expected him to return with the same commanding presence, but something in him had shifted. When he walked into the office, people noticed the difference. He didn't bark orders as loudly. He didn't laugh as much. His eyes, once sharp and proud, now carried a weight of reflection. Still, there was one thing he needed to do. One afternoon, he walked into the cafeteria where the janitor worked. The room fell silent as people recognized him. The CEO was rarely seen in such places, and his presence drew curious stares. But he wasn't there for food. His eyes searched until they landed on the man pushing a mop across the floor. The janitor looked up, surprised to see him. For a brief second, he braced himself for another insult. Old habits were hard to forget. But what came next left everyone stunned. The CEO walked slowly toward him, then stopped right in front of him. For the first time, he didn't look down at him with mockery. His voice was low, trembling slightly. "I owe you my life," he said, "and I owe you an apology." The cafeteria went silent. The janitor blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. "I mocked you," the CEO continued. "I judged you unfairly. I treated you as less than human. And yet, when I was on the floor fighting for breath, you were the only one who stepped forward. You saved me when no one else did. I don't deserve that kind of kindness." His eyes watered, and he turned away briefly, embarrassed by his own tears. The janitor stood still, his hands resting on the mop handle. He wasn't used to hearing words like that from someone like the CEO. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. Finally, he spoke softly. "I didn't save you because of who you are. I saved you because it was the right thing to do. Life is precious. No one deserves to die alone, no matter how they've treated others." The CEO swallowed hard. Those words pierced him deeper than any insult ever could. He felt his throat tighten as he realized the depth of the man's humanity. "I was blind," the CEO admitted. "Blind to what really matters. You work harder than anyone here, yet I treated you like you were nothing. But you are. More than I ever understood. You're stronger than I am." His voice broke and a tear slipped down his cheek. People around the cafeteria looked on in shock. No one had ever seen the CEO so vulnerable. Some even wiped their own eyes, moved by the moment. The janitor nodded, offering a faint smile. "We all have our struggles. Mine are different from yours, but that doesn't make either of us more or less important. What matters is how we treat each other." The CEO lowered his head, ashamed. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "But I want you to know I will never forget what you did for me." There was a long pause, heavy with unspoken words. Then the janitor gently said, "Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about letting go. And I don't carry anger in my heart. I can't. My child needs me to be better than that." Those words hit the CEO harder than any lecture could. He realized that this man, who had every reason to hate him, chose instead to show grace. And in that moment, the CEO understood something he had never known before. True strength came not from wealth or status, but from humility, kindness, and love. Tears blurred his vision. He extended his hand, trembling slightly. The janitor looked at it, then slowly reached out and shook it. The room erupted into quiet murmurs. People had witnessed not just an apology, but a transformation. From that day, the CEO carried himself differently. He still wore fine suits and ran a company, but his heart was no longer the same. He began greeting workers by name, listening instead of dismissing, noticing instead of ignoring. He remembered the janitor's words, "What matters is how we treat each other." And for the janitor, life went on. He still woke early, packed lunches, and worked long hours. But now he carried a small sense of peace, knowing that even in a world where kindness was often overlooked, it still had the power to change hearts. The moment in the cafeteria had turned laughter into tears, not of mockery, but of humility and gratitude. And both men, in their own way, walked away changed. The morning sunlight spilled through the tiny apartment window. The single dad rubbed his eyes, feeling the ache in his body from the long night shift. He glanced at his child, still sleeping soundly, hair tousled and chest rising and falling gently. The father smiled softly, grateful for another day to protect and care for this small life entrusted to him. The day began like any other. He prepared breakfast, packed the school bag, and walked his child to the bus stop. Yet something in the air felt different. A quiet sense of change, almost unnoticeable but present. It came from a conversation he wasn't expecting. A knock at the apartment door. When he opened it, his eyes widened. Standing there was the CEO, holding a small envelope and a kind, nervous smile. The man who had once mocked him, laughed at his worn shoes, and questioned his worth now stood humbly on his doorstep. "Good morning," the CEO said softly. "I wanted to speak with you. May I come in?" The father stepped aside, motioning him in. Inside, the apartment was simple, a little cramped but filled with warmth, the kind that money could never buy. I wanted to do more than just apologize," the CEO began. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, about how you risked your life to save mine. And I realize that I have the means to make a difference, not just for me, but for you and your child." The father listened quietly, unsure where this conversation would go. "I want to offer you a job," the CEO continued. "Not a temporary position, not something small. A stable, meaningful role where you can use your skills, where your work and dedication will be valued. And I'd like to help with your child's education if you'll allow me." The father blinked, taken aback. The offer wasn't just generous. It was transformative. For years he had struggled to make ends meet, juggling jobs that left him exhausted and barely able to provide. Now the path ahead seemed brighter, but he hesitated. Pride was not something easily set aside. I don't know what to say," he said slowly. "I've managed so far. My child is happy. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness." The CEO shook his head. "This isn't about taking advantage. It's about giving you a chance. You saved my life. I don't want that to be meaningless. I want to honor your courage and your heart. Please let me do this." The father looked at his child's school books on the small desk, then at the tired but earnest face of the man before him. Finally, he nodded. "If it will help my child, then thank you." Over the next few weeks, life began to change. The father took on a new role in the company, a position that required responsibility, yes, but also respected his experience and work ethic. He wasn't just a janitor or a background worker anymore. He was trusted, appreciated, and given opportunities to grow. He still worked hard, but the exhaustion eased. Now he could come home without the constant gnaw of worry over bills or groceries, and his child noticed the difference immediately. Meals were warmer. There were new books for school, and occasional treats that had once been luxuries became simple joys. The CEO also kept his promise about education. He met with the father to discuss school plans, scholarships, and activities for the child. He listened with genuine interest, offering guidance without arrogance, showing patience he had never known before. The father, in turn, felt a strange mix of gratitude and pride, not for what he received, but for the recognition of effort and courage. But perhaps the most important change was in the CEO himself. He carried the lesson from the day he had nearly died like a quiet flame. He no longer looked down on people, no longer judged worth by clothes, cars, or titles. He walked through his office with a different perspective, greeting employees with a smile, asking about their families, listening to their concerns. People noticed, and slowly respect replaced fear. One afternoon, the CEO invited the father and his child to a small company gathering, just a friendly lunch in the courtyard. The father was hesitant at first, worried about being judged again. But the CEO met his gaze and said, "You don't have to worry. This is about friendship, not status. You're part of my life now, in a real way." At the gathering, the child ran around the courtyard laughing freely while the father watched with a smile. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of belonging in a world that had often ignored him. The CEO joined him later, sitting on the bench with a plate of food, keeping a respectful distance but speaking with openness. "I've learned a lot from you," the CEO said quietly. "Not about business or success, but about courage, patience, and what really matters in life. Your kindness saved me. Your dedication to your child shows me what true responsibility is. I want to carry that forward in everything I do." The father nodded, feeling the weight of the words. "It's never too late to change," he said. "I believe everyone can if they try." From that day, the relationship between the two men shifted from one of mockery and fear to respect and understanding. They were different in every possible way: background, wealth, education, but they shared a human connection that went beyond appearances. Both had been tested by life, both had faced challenges, and both had learned that compassion often comes when least expected. Over time, the father's life became steadier. The new job allowed him to plan for the future, to save a little each month, and to give his child experiences that had once seemed impossible. He could attend school meetings without worrying about missing work, take weekends for family time, and even dream a little. The child, once aware only of struggle and sacrifice, now saw a world of possibilities. He saw his father respected and appreciated, and he learned a lesson more powerful than any textbook. Courage, kindness, and integrity matter more than wealth or status. The CEO, too, grew in ways he never expected. He became a mentor, not just to the father, but to others in the company. His perspective shifted from self-interest to community, from arrogance to empathy. He remembered every detail of the day he had nearly died: the fear, the vulnerability, the hands that had lifted him from darkness. That memory became the compass by which he navigated his life, reminding him daily of the value of every human being. Months passed, and one chilly evening the father sat by the window, sipping tea while his child did homework nearby. He reflected on the past year, the hardships, the insults, the long nights, and the quiet victories. Life was still far from perfect, but hope and gratitude filled the small apartment. There was a knock at the door. The CEO stood there again, smiling, holding a small gift for the child, a set of books the father had mentioned weeks before, stories full of adventure and imagination. "Here," he said, "for your little one." I thought he might enjoy them. The child ran forward, eyes wide with excitement, and hugged the CEO. "Thank you," he exclaimed. The father watched silently, heart full. In this moment, he understood something simple and profound. Kindness is never wasted. It can change lives, open doors, and build bridges where none seemed possible. The CEO stayed for a while, chatting casually with both father and child. There was laughter, stories, and a genuine warmth that had never existed between them before. It wasn't about power or status anymore. It was about human connection. When he finally left, the father closed the door slowly, looking at his child and smiling. "See," he said softly, "people can change. And good things can happen when you least expect them." The child nodded, eyes shining. "I want to be brave like you, Dad. I want to help people too." The father hugged him tightly. "You already are every day just by being kind and believing in others." From that day on, the father and child lived with a sense of stability and hope. The CEO continued to honor the promise he had made, not as a favor, but as a recognition of courage and humanity. Their lives, once separated by mocking laughter and misunderstanding, now moved forward in respect, gratitude, and the quiet power of kindness. The world outside remained busy, full of challenges and uncertainties, but within the small apartment there was peace. The single dad knew that no matter what came next, he had the strength to face it, the love to guide his child, and the proof that even the harshest moments could lead to something beautiful. And the CEO, forever changed by the man he had once mocked, carried a simple truth in his heart. Human worth is not measured by wealth, status, or appearance. It is measured by courage, kindness, and the willingness to see the value in every life. Together, their story became a quiet legend of hope, a reminder that laughter can turn to tears, that insults can turn to respect, and that a single act of bravery can change the course of many lives. The months after the CEO's recovery brought a new rhythm to life for the single dad and his child. Days that had once been heavy with worry and exhaustion now held a quiet sense of possibility. The new job at the company gave him stability, but it was more than just money. It was respect, validation, and a space where his effort truly mattered. Each morning he woke before the sun, but he no longer felt the same fatigue that had once weighed on him like a constant shadow. There was a lightness in his step, a confidence that came not from wealth, but from knowing he had taken life into his own hands and changed it for the better. His child, now thriving, walked to school with a bounce in his step, school bag neatly packed with new supplies, his shoes clean and sturdy. The little one still talked endlessly about adventures, about dreams of becoming an artist, a scientist, or maybe even a hero someday. And every night the father would listen patiently, encouraging imagination, instilling the values of kindness and courage that had always guided him. One afternoon, the CEO requested a private meeting with the father. The man had grown quieter, more reflective, carrying himself differently than before. Gone was the arrogance, replaced by a measured humility that drew attention not through fear but respect. "I wanted to talk to you about something important," the CEO began, folding his hands on the desk. "Ever since that day, I've realized that life is too short to let pride or fear guide decisions. I want to create a program in our company, a way to help employees who struggle just like you did. I want to provide support, training, and opportunities for growth, because I know how it feels to be overlooked." The father was surprised. "You want me to help set it up?" "Yes," the CEO said. "You understand hard work, resilience, and compassion in a way I never could. You're the one who can guide this program so it really helps people." The father paused, thinking of his own journey, the exhaustion, the sacrifices, the moments when giving up had seemed easier than continuing, but he also remembered how courage had carried him through, how kindness had changed even the hardest heart. "I'll do it," he said finally. "If it helps others, I'll do it." Together they began designing the program. It focused on employees who had talent but struggled with life's challenges, single parents, those with health issues, people returning to work after setbacks. They implemented mentorship, flexible hours, and financial support. Word spread quickly, and employees who had once felt invisible began to feel seen and valued. The child noticed the changes too. "Dad," he said one evening, "you're helping so many people." "That's amazing," the father ruffled his hair. "Sometimes doing the right thing is bigger than just helping ourselves. It can change many lives." Life wasn't without its challenges, though. The single dad still had moments of fatigue, days when bills stacked up, or unexpected repairs at the apartment threatened to upset the fragile balance. But now he faced them with support from the job, from colleagues, and even from the CEO, who had become a surprising friend and mentor. One day, the father received a call from the CEO. "I have a proposal," he said. "We want to give you a permanent role that comes with benefits, a steady salary, and even a place to mentor others directly. You've shown what courage and kindness can do. Now we want you to help others experience the same." The father felt a lump in his throat. This was more than just recognition. It was validation that his life, his choices, and his sacrifices mattered. I'm honored," he said. As the years went by, their bond deepened. The CEO visited the apartment occasionally, bringing books, games, or treats for the child. He also sought advice from the father on how to lead the company with empathy and fairness. In turn, the father found himself respected not just for the work he did, but for the wisdom and humanity he carried with him. The community around them began to notice the change. Coworkers who had once feared the CEO now felt inspired. Employees shared their stories of struggle, and the program helped them find stability and pride in their work. The company became a model for compassion and practical support, all rooted in the single father's quiet courage and the CEO's willingness to change. Outside of work, life blossomed in smaller, quieter ways. The child excelled at school, making friends easily and discovering new passions. Weekends became filled with simple joys, Picnics in the park, trips to the library, or evenings spent playing board games on the living room floor. The father no longer worried constantly about survival. He could focus on teaching his child lessons that no school could provide: resilience, integrity, and the strength of the human heart. One evening, while watching the sunset from their small balcony, the father reflected on the journey they had been through. From the days of mockery, exhaustion, and endless struggle, to moments of bravery, recognition, and quiet triumph, the journey had been long, but it had shaped them into stronger, kinder people. He looked at the child, who was painting on a small canvas, and whispered, "Never forget, the world may not always see you, but your actions matter. Your heart matters." "That's what makes a difference," the child looked up, smiling. "I'll remember, Dad. I'll always try to help others." Meanwhile, the CEO, in his office high above the city, often thought back to the day he had almost died. He realized that life was fragile and unpredictable. One act of courage from a man he had dismissed had saved him, and that lesson stayed with him every day. He no longer measured people by status, but by the strength and kindness of their hearts. Sometimes he would call the father simply to check in, or to ask for guidance on a decision. And every time, he was reminded that respect and compassion could build bridges stronger than any contract or title. The story of that single father spread quietly through the company and beyond. Not through media, but through people talking, inspired by the courage and humanity he displayed. His actions had ripple effects. Employees who had felt invisible now felt empowered. Children who had grown up seeing hard work rewarded now believed in fairness, and even the CEO's outlook on life had transformed. Yet the father remained humble. He never sought recognition, never boasted of his role in saving a life. For him, the greatest reward was seeing his child smile, knowing he had created a safe, loving environment, and witnessing a man who once mocked him grow into someone who understood compassion. The city outside continued to move at its relentless pace. Some people rushed past without noticing the small moments of kindness happening around them. But within the walls of the small apartment, in the offices of the company, and in the quiet spaces of hearts touched by courage, there was a sense of hope. One rainy afternoon, the father and child stood by the window, watching droplets race down the glass. The child turned to him and said, "Dad, do you think people can really change?" The father smiled, holding the little hand tightly. "I've seen it happen. Even the hardest hearts can soften. Even the proudest can learn humility. And the world becomes better when people take the time to be kind." That night, the father tucked his child into bed, whispering the same words he had spoken years before, but now with deeper meaning. "Tomorrow will be better. We will make it better together." And outside, the city lights twinkled, unaware of the quiet victories unfolding in small apartments, office hallways, and hearts transformed by courage, kindness, and a single act of bravery that had changed many lives. The single dad had gone from being mocked and invisible to being respected and admired, not for wealth, or status, or power, but for something far more enduring: the strength of his character, the love for his child, and the courage to act when it mattered most. The CEO, once arrogant and dismissive, had learned the same lesson. Humility, compassion, and gratitude could reshape lives and lead to something far more meaningful than money or influence. Together, they had created a story that would quietly inspire others, showing that no act of courage is ever wasted, no kindness is ever unnoticed, and that even the smallest gestures can ripple outward, changing the world in ways we may never fully see. And as the father turned off the light, listening to the soft breathing of his child, he knew that the journey was ongoing. Life would continue to bring challenges, but armed with love, courage, and hope, he and his child could face anything. And somewhere, high above, the CEO carried that lesson in his heart. A constant reminder that life's most powerful moments often come from unexpected places, and the bonds of humanity can triumph over pride, fear, and injustice. It had been a year since the single dad's life had been changed in ways he could never have imagined. He had started his new role in the company with some hesitation, but over time he had grown into it, proving himself to be not just a hard worker, but a leader in his own right. The company had indeed transformed, thanks to the programs they had implemented, inspired by his quiet courage. No longer was the company simply focused on profits and status. Now they focused on community, on lifting people up and making sure no one was left behind. The father's role in this shift wasn't something he boasted about. He preferred to keep his head down, working hard, and letting the results speak for themselves. His child, now a little older, continued to flourish in ways the father had once only dreamed of. School grades improved, and the child took an active interest in social causes, speaking up about helping others and standing up for fairness. It was clear to the father that his actions were shaping his child's view of the world. The lessons of kindness, compassion, and hard work were deeply rooted in the child's heart, and that was the most rewarding thing of all. But life, as always, had new challenges in store. One morning, the father received a call from the CEO, who for the first time seemed anxious. "I need to speak with you about something important," the CEO said. "It's about the company's future. I'm facing a difficult decision and I need your perspective." The father immediately agreed to meet, though his mind raced with questions. What could be troubling the CEO, who had seemed so confident in the past? They met in the CEO's office later that afternoon. The room was high above the city, but today the windows felt less inviting than usual. The CEO looked tired, his usual polished demeanor replaced by a subtle tension. "Things are changing," the CEO said, pausing to look out the window. "The business world is becoming more competitive. We're facing new threats, and the decisions we make now could determine the future of the company. Some of the board members are suggesting we cut costs, eliminate the programs we've created to support people like you and the others we've helped. They believe that focusing on profitability is more important than the values we've worked so hard to build." The father's heart sank. The programs they had created together were working. People were thriving, growing, and finding new opportunities. The idea of cutting those initiatives seemed wrong, but he also understood how the world of business worked. Profits often took precedence over people. "I thought we agreed that values mattered more than just numbers," the father said quietly, looking directly at the CEO. "We did," the CEO replied, his voice heavy with conflict. "But when faced with a difficult choice, some people don't see it that way. I'm caught in the middle. If I push too hard, the board might turn against me. But if I give in, we risk losing everything we've worked for." The father took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation. He knew that the decision wasn't easy. He had seen firsthand how the company had changed, how it had transformed from a place of indifference to one of support and community. To take that away would be a step backward for everyone. "I think you need to remember why we started this," the father said. "It wasn't just about surviving. It was about building something that was sustainable for the people who rely on us. Cutting those programs would hurt more than just the employees. It would hurt the company's soul." The CEO met his eyes, silent for a moment, before nodding. "You're right," he said. "I've been focusing too much on the numbers and not enough on the people. I've lost sight of why we began this in the first place." The father's heart felt lighter knowing that the CEO had truly listened. "You can't let fear dictate your choices," he said. "People will respect you for standing firm in what you believe, not for just making the easy decisions." Over the next few days, the CEO worked tirelessly, meeting with the board, defending the programs they had put in place. It was an uphill battle, but he refused to back down. The single dad continued with his work, supporting the CEO's efforts behind the scenes, helping to gather stories from employees whose lives had been changed by the company's new approach. Together, they built a strong case for why those values were not just a luxury but a necessity. 1 week later, the CEO called the father into his office. There was a hint of relief in his voice. "We did it," the CEO said. "The board agreed to keep the programs. They see now that it's not just good for the people, it's good for business too." The father smiled. "I knew you'd make it through. People want to feel valued, not just like cogs in a machine. When you invest in them, they invest in the company." The CEO nodded, a genuine smile crossing his face. "And I owe a lot of that to you. You've shown me what leadership truly is. Not just making the hard decisions, but making the right ones. You've taught me what it means to be a true leader." That evening, the father went home to his child, who had been eagerly awaiting news of what had happened. As they sat down for dinner, the father shared the good news about the programs being saved, and the child's eyes sparkled with pride. "I knew you could do it, Dad," the child exclaimed. "You're helping so many people." The father chuckled, ruffling the child's hair. "We're all helping each other. That's how it works." In the weeks that followed, the company continued to grow. More employees were promoted, more families were supported, and more people felt like they were part of something bigger than themselves. The father's work became a beacon of what a company could be when it prioritized human connections over just profits. The CEO, too, grew in his understanding of leadership. He no longer measured success by stock prices alone, but by the lives he impacted. His approach had shifted from a focus on numbers to a focus on people, and it paid off, not just in business terms, but in the loyalty and respect of his employees. As the year came to a close, the CEO invited the father and his child to a company-wide event. It was a celebration of everything they had achieved together, and the CEO made a point to publicly acknowledge the father for his role in the company's success. "We've all made progress," the CEO said in front of a crowd, "but none of this would have been possible without one person who taught us all what it means to truly care. To act with integrity, to lead with heart." The crowd erupted in applause, and the father stood there a little uncomfortable with the attention, but grateful. He wasn't doing this for recognition. He was doing it because it was the right thing to do. That evening, as the celebration continued, the father stood outside, looking out over the city. His child stood beside him, holding his hand, both of them feeling the warmth of a journey that had come full circle. "You've changed everything," the child said softly. "You're a hero." The father smiled, his heart full. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who tried to do the right thing." As the night wore on, the father felt a sense of peace. The challenges they had faced, the battles they had fought, had brought them here, to a place of hope, stability, and respect. It wasn't always easy, and there would always be new challenges. But the father knew now that they were ready for anything. The city hummed with life around them, but in that moment, it felt like the world had slowed down, just for them. And in the quiet, under the soft glow of the streetlights, the father knew that everything had changed, not just for him, but for everyone who had been touched by his actions. The journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more struggles, and more growth. But they were no longer walking it alone. And together, they could face anything the world threw their way.